Pauline Tully, our Vice Chairperson, do you want to kick off?
Good morning to you both, and thank you for coming here to present to us. And your presentation is excellent. I think over the last few weeks and months, when we've had different witnesses come in and present, there are a couple of common themes that are emerging, especially when we're dealing with education or employment sectors. And one is training, or the lack of training for the personnel involved. So do you feel that more staff need training in how to deal with disability and in the provision of supports for their students? I mean, is there enough awareness among staff, I suppose, is what I'm asking, and are they cognizant that they may have students who require supports within their classes or within their departments?
Yeah, of course. I think there is a very good foundation within HEIs and third level institutions that staff are able to build on in regards to training and stuff, but and you as I will believe that further training is required, particularly surrounding managing the disclosure of disabilities, managing hidden disabilities, even basic training such as understanding how to use the basic technology they're provided with to support those students. Having an understanding of this technology that they are using to support students will ultimately benefit the students in the long run. With that as well, there is also really a need for training surrounding the wider impacts societally that these disabilities can have on these students, and taking those things into account, because many staff in third level will have understandings of disability and the basic understanding of how to support and kind of the basics of it, but oftentimes the societal impact and the impact that these pressures will have on these students in both a social and academic sense are much wider than beyond what they see in the classroom. And having that training to manage the potential mental health side effects or the well-being side effects on top of the basic struggles of living with that disability is incredibly important.
Yeah. Because like a lot of, from even early on, from parents of small children right on through, they tell you they have to fight for supports on a continual basis. And again, you mentioned there that those supports should be available. And I mean, to encourage more people with disabilities to pursue further education, I think the supports have to be made available at ease, basically, that they don't have to go and fight for something that they need, because going to third level is daunting enough for anybody, but if you have got an additional need, the supports should be there. I suppose another thing that comes up regularly is the cost of disability, and again you've referenced it there. So I mean, like, again, do you think that the here and the there are given enough support, are financed to the level they should be? Is there more could be done there? And do you think awareness of those programmes are sufficient? Do you think more could be done to highlight those?
Yeah, I think they're fantastic programmes, and they are the reason that so many students are currently in the higher education sector, and we're very grateful for that. But I think also they were implemented a long time ago, and these things need to be kept up to date and renewed and invested in. We need to ensure that students are part of those conversations when we are examining them and engaging with the stakeholders, such as AHEAD, who have done incredible work in ensuring that students are empowered to disclose their disabilities across the sector. So I think they really are fantastic, but we need to keep the pressure on to ensure that they are keeping up with how quickly the sector is changing. We are entering this new digital era, sort of referred to earlier, where students are having to catch up, where staff are having to catch up on their digital capabilities in order to be appropriate when entering the workforce, so that they're prepared to enter the workforce. So I think that there is a lot left to do there. I think when students enter college under an access scheme, they're often provided with the resources that they need up front. If a student is diagnosed with a disability during their studies, that is another barrier, because you have to try and re-engage in that system that is typically not set up for a third year, requiring disability supports. So I think that there is a long way to go. They're great to be built upon, but they are a little outdated if we look at the requirements of staff and students across the sector at the moment.
Okay, so that's something we can take up with the Minister for Higher Education, that they need to be updated. And just the National Access Target Plan is 8%. Do you think it's high enough? I think the actual, according to AHEAD figures, it's actually been higher than that, and what would you see could be done to encourage more disabled students to take up positions in third level? Because just to say, I have witnessed and I've been aware of many students with disabilities, particularly intellectual disabilities, who've gone through mainstream secondary level, have sat a Leaving Cert, and then go to a day service where their needs are not met, where they actually regress rather than progress. And we want to see more options for everybody to progress from second level on. So, I know it's kind of a broad question, but, what could be done to encourage more people?
I mean, there's a number of avenues you can discuss in that. I think the primary thing, and it's something that, like you touched on and we touched on, is that the supports available for these students needs to be a constant source of support and available, rather than reactionary to the student inquiring about the supports. The support should be in place before the student even enters the institution, because just the mere prospect of disclosing identity, disclosing disability, can ultimately have a huge toll on the student in question. If the student knows that they won't have to fight, and they know that that fight doesn't even exist anymore, they're going to be more likely to engage in a system. Whereas if they know to access third level education, that realistically having to fight and argue and struggle to get actual supports that they need to access a basic human right, you can hardly blame them for not wanting to engage in that system at that point. On top of that, it's really making it clear that those supports are available. When I entered third level education, I wasn't even aware of a lot of supports like Darren here. They weren't talked about in schools, they weren't advertised. It was something I found out very much secondhand as I went through college and experienced other people. And I have a lot of peers who had similar experiences where they weren't made aware of supports for the likes of dyslexia, or like your kind of more common disabilities that people would encounter going to third level education. They weren't made aware of them until they were in fourth year, and at that point it's far too late for them to benefit in the way that they're structured to even exist in the first place. With that as well, the public diagnostic services would be a huge benefit to these students, because ultimately there are a lot of students who will be aware that they are in need of at least a review or some form of communication with psychiatry or something like that in order to get that piece of paper to avail of said supports, and they cannot access it due to the cost of it. The example I'll use is ADHD. There is no publicly funded ADHD services within Ireland. It is all private currently, and it is entirely inaccessible. You're looking at paying upwards of £1,000 just to access an ADHD diagnosis. Many institutions will not support you unless you have an official diagnosis, so you can't access those supports. So having these supports and having these basic stuff and basic infrastructure in place before the student even encounters the issues at the third level will really increase the amount of students with disabilities that we see engaging with these institutions.
So I suppose a regular review of assessments of need is needed, and it needs to happen probably in the school and in the college, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And if I could add to that as well, I think the design of the courses that we offer are incredibly important. If a student has a long-term chronic illness, a part-time course is going to be an awful lot more accessible for that student than a full-time course that requires your presence on campus. We've already touched on, the need for the universal design for learning. If we really reach the place where we need to be with that, some students might not need to access additional disability services supports. If we set up the system to be accessible at the first point of contact, that is the ultimate goal. But also with postgraduate study, we see a huge drop-off. We're seeing a fantastic increase in students getting into level 5, 6, 7, 8, but it immediately dropped off after that. We have nothing that replicates the likes of the Here and There schemes for further studies in the postgraduate remit. So I think that is a huge issue that we need to tackle going forward, and ensuring that the likes of PhDs isn't an unachievable task for a student with a disability, and that students can access it in the way that they can. And if anything, we've seen that the last 2 years we can be more flexible, and we can provide the services to those students that they need.
Yeah, the point you made about the part-time learning was raised last week by a student with a lot of illnesses and chronic pain, and couldn't do a full-time course, but didn't have an option to do it on a part-time basis over a longer period of time. So, okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much.